The smell of a garage is a kind of poetry if you know how to read it. Mine smelled of history. Not just the faint, sweet scent of WD, 40 and gasoline, but something deeper, the rich aroma of sawdust from old projects, the hint of leather from the seats of my 72 Cheyenne, and underneath it all, the clean, earthy fragrance of the potting soil my wife Helen used to keep on the bottom shelf. For me, a retired mechanic, this garage wasn't just a workspace, it was a library of a life well lived. And on that clear September afternoon, I was just writing the final sentence of a chapter. The last piece of chrome on the truck's grill gleamed under the fluorescent lights, so perfect it looked like liquid silver. I wiped it one last time with a soft flannel cloth, the same one I'd used for 30 years, and stood back with a quiet, bone-deep satisfaction. Retirement, for some of my buddies, had been a kind of slow surrender. They'd traded their wrenches for remote controls and complained about having nothing to do. Not me. I found a rhythm in it. My days were measured in small, meaningful tasks, fixing misses. Gable's leaky faucet down the street, tending to the rose bushes Helen had planted, and of course, keeping my old truck in pristine condition. This truck was more than a vehicle. It was my ticket to freedom. Every year, me and two old friends from the shop, Dave and Mac, would make the pilgrimage from Cedar Falls down to Reno for the hot August night's car show. It was our tradition, a week of basking in the glory of American steel, telling the same old stories, and feeling like young men again. This year felt special. I'd finally finished the truck's restoration, a 5-year project, and I couldn't wait to see the look on their faces. I closed the hood gently, the latch catching with a solid, reassuring thunk. My eyes drifted past the organized chaos of the garage, through the open side door, to the house. Our house. A classic craftsman bungalow, with a wide front porch and deep overhanging eaves that gave it a look of permanent, settled peace. When Helen and I first bought it, it was a wreck. But we saw the good bones under the peeling paint and sagging porch. We'd spent years bringing it back to life side by side. I'd handled the structure, the wiring, the plumbing, the framework, while she had handled the soul. She chose the warm, earthy colors for the walls, planted the wisteria that now snaked its way up the porch columns in a riot of purple every spring, and laid out the garden that was the envy of the neighborhood. Standing there, I could almost see her, kneeling by the flower beds with her straw hat on, humming a tune that was just slightly off-key. The house wasn't just wood and nails. It was a monument to our 42 years together. That was why I never considered moving after she passed. It was the last place that still felt like her, and it was where I could keep my promise. On one of her last good days, her hand frail in mine, she'd made me swear, "Take care of our boy Art," she'd whispered. "Make sure this house always takes care of Kevin." And I had. When Kevin and his wife Jess were struggling to get a loan for their own place, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world to offer them this one. "Live here," I'd said. "Pay what you can on the mortgage. It's your home. We'll be a family, all under one roof." For a while it worked, but in the last few years things had started to feel different. Jess, with her sharp ambition and her perfectly curated life on social media, had a way of looking at my old things, Helen's furniture, my dusty shop manuals, as if they were an inconvenience. Just last month, she gestured at my wall of neatly hung tools and said, "We could really open up this space, make it a proper 2-car garage, you know?" I just smiled, but the comment left a small, cold stone in my gut. Kevin, my son, just seemed to drift in her wake, always agreeing, always trying to keep the peace. He was a good man, I told myself, just busy with his career, trying to build a life, but I brushed the thought aside. A little friction was normal. Families were complicated. I locked the garage door, the tumblers clicking into place with a familiar sound. The truck was ready. My bag was packed. Dave was picking me up at dawn. I took one last look at the house, the porch light casting a warm, welcoming glow. It was solid. It was ours. I felt a deep, unwavering sense of contentment. I had my friends, I had my memories, and I had my family, safe and sound in the home my wife and I had built with our own 2 hands. Everything was exactly as it should be. The drive back from Reno was a long, satisfying hum of rubber on asphalt. Dave had the wheel of his F-150, and my Cheyenne was safely trailered behind us, gleaming even under a layer of road dust. We'd had a good trip. My truck had taken a 3rd-place ribbon in its class, and we'd spent 5 days talking shop, drinking cheap beer, and soaking in the Nevada Sunday. As we rolled back into the familiar green canopy of the Pacific Northwest, a sense of deep comfort settled over me. There's a unique kind of peace that comes from leaving home, and an even better one that comes from returning to it. When Dave dropped me in the trailer at the end of my street, he slapped me on the back. "Don't be a stranger, Art. Come by the shop next week. Tell us all about how you're going to spend that big prize money." I laughed, waved him off, and felt the familiar rumble of the Cheyenne's engine as I drove the last few hundred yards home. The late afternoon sun was filtering through the giant cedar trees that gave our town its name, casting long, lazy shadows across the lawns. I saw Mrs. Gable's cat dart across the road. I saw the recycling bins lined up, waiting for tomorrow's pickup. Everything was exactly as it should be, a perfect picture of a quiet, orderly life. I turned into my driveway, my mind already on the simple pleasure of unlocking my own front door, putting my bag down, and sinking into my worn leather armchair. But as the truck's headlights swept across the front of the house, my foot froze on the brake. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. On the lawn, just to the right of the stone walkway Helen and I had laid by hand, was a massive, shapeless lump covered by a thin, semi-transparent plastic tarp. It looked like a pile of construction debris, a scar on the otherwise immaculate green grass. My first thought was a burst pipe, a fire, some kind of emergency that had forced them to clear out the house in a hurry. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me, my heart hammering against my ribs. I killed the engine and practically fell out of the truck, my boots crunching on the gravel. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. But now there was another smell, too, the musty odor of damp cardboard and old fabric. I reached the pile and pulled back a corner of the crinkling tarp. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't debris. This was my life. My bright red tool chests, the ones I'd saved for years to buy, were stacked haphazardly, a deep scratch running down the side of the top one. Next to them was a cardboard box, its flaps soggy and open to the sky. Inside, I could see the cracked spines of my old shop manuals and, sticking out from underneath, the corner of a photo album. Helen's cursive on the label was unmistakable. Kevin's first steps, 1,983. My breath caught in my throat. I saw my fishing gear, my favorite rod snapped in two, the reels tangled in a mess of line and lures. I saw a box of Helen's gardening journals, their pages swollen and warped from the damp. This wasn't the work of an emergency crew. This was a ransacking. It was a violation. Every item was a memory, a piece of my history, and it had all been hauled out and left to rot on the grass with the indifference you'd show to actual garbage. I stumbled back, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. Some colossal misunderstanding. Maybe they'd been cleaning the basement, and it had started to rain? No, that didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. I walked toward the front door in a daze, stepping over a scattered pile of my old flannel shirts. The beautiful porch, the one I'd rebuilt with my own hands, felt alien and unwelcoming. I fumbled in my pocket for my keys, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. I slid my house key, the same simple brass key I'd used for 30 years, into the lock. It went in halfway and stopped dead. I pulled it out, stared at it as if it had betrayed me, and tried again. Nothing. It wouldn't turn. I leaned closer, my eyes struggling to focus in the fading light. The old, familiar brass lock set was gone. In its place was a sleek, black rectangle with a keypad, a smart lock, the kind Jess had mentioned wanting a few months ago, saying they were cleaner and more secure. The key in my hand felt utterly useless, a relic from a past that apparently no longer existed. The sight of that cold, impersonal keypad did what the pile of my belongings could not. It shattered my denial. This was not a mistake. This was not an accident. This was deliberate. An eviction. I stood there on my own front porch, a trespasser at my own home, the silence of the evening pressing in on me. The house remained dark and quiet, offering no explanation. Then, behind me, I heard the soft crunch of tires turning into the driveway. Headlights washed over me, pinning me in their glare like a startled animal. The engine of the sleek, white SUV cut out, plunging the driveway back into the quiet of the evening. For a moment, no one moved. Then, the driver's side door opened with a soft electronic beep, and Jessica emerged. She was dressed in stylishly casual clothes that looked like they'd been chosen for a magazine photo shoot, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat, severe ponytail. She moved with a brisk, efficient energy, her heels clicking on the gravel as she rounded the front of the car. The passenger door opened more slowly. Kevin unfolded himself from the seat, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the ground in front of him. He looked like a man being led to his own execution. Jess stopped a few feet away from me on the stone walkway, her arms crossed. Her expression wasn't angry or guilty. It was one of mild impatience, like I was a delivery that had arrived at an inconvenient time. "Art," she said, her voice even, and smooth as polished granite. "I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk before you saw all this. It's a bit messier than I'd planned." I stared at her, then at the mountain of my life sitting on the damp grass. My voice felt like a foreign object in my throat. "Messy? Jess, what in God's name is going on? There was an emergency? A fire?" A small, tight smile touched her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No, nothing like that. Think of this as a reorganization. A necessary one. We paid off the last of the mortgage last week." She said it with a note of finality, as if that single fact explained everything. I just stared at her, the words failing to connect in my brain. I turned my gaze to my son, who was still lingering by the car, pretending to check something on his phone. "Kevin?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "Son, what is she talking about?" Kevin flinched at the sound of his name. He finally looked up, but his eyes darted around, focusing on the roofline, the trees, anywhere but my face. "Dad, we needed to make a change," he mumbled, the words barely audible. It was time. Jess stepped forward, taking control again. "What your husband is trying to say, Art, is that your financial role here is complete. We're grateful for all the help you've given us over the years, of course. But the original arrangement is obsolete. We need the space now. All of it. For our life." The word obsolete hung in the air, cold and heavy. Obsolete. Like a worn-out part you toss in the scrap heap. The blood began to pound in my ears, a slow, hot rhythm of disbelief turning into a glacial fury. I looked down at my hands, the knuckles scarred, the nails permanently rimmed with the memory of grease and oil. These were the hands that had fixed Kevin's first bike, built the treehouse in the backyard, and worked 60 hours a week for 40 years to provide for my family. Now, they were the hands of an obsolete man. "Your life?" I said, my own voice sounding distant to me. "This is my home, Helen's home. Everything I own is in that pile. And that's the problem, don't you see?" Jess said, her tone shifting to one of strained reason, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "It's all just clutter. Old tools, dusty boxes, furniture that doesn't fit the aesthetic we're trying to create. This property has so much potential, and we can't realize it with all of this history holding it back." The sheer, calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. She wasn't just throwing me out, she was erasing me, erasing Helen. The promise I made to my wife on her deathbed echoed in my mind, a bitter, mocking laugh. "Take care of our boy. Make sure this house always takes care of Kevin." I had, and this was my reward. I took a step toward my son, forcing him to finally meet my gaze. In his eyes, I didn't see malice. I saw something far worse, a hollow, defeated shame. He had been a passenger in the destruction of his own father. "You're letting her do this, Kevin? This is how it ends? You just stand there?" He broke eye contact, his face crumbling. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be," he whispered. Jess let out an exasperated sigh and pulled out her phone, her thumb starting to scroll. "Look, we're not monsters, Art. We packed up the things we thought were most important to you. A few boxes of clothes, your personal papers. They're by the garage door. I suggest you find a motel for the night and get your things in the morning. A U-Haul shouldn't be too expensive." She said it so casually, tapping away at her screen as if she were ordering groceries. With that, she turned, walked to the new keypad on the door, and punched in a code. Kevin gave me one last, fleeting look of what might have been regret, then followed her. The heavy oak door, the one I'd stained and sealed myself, clicked shut behind them, leaving me alone in the encroaching darkness. The porch light didn't come on. For a long time I didn't move. I just stood there in the driveway, the chill of the September night seeping into my bones. The house remained dark, a great hulking silhouette against the star-dusted sky. It looked like my house, had the same roofline I'd shingled myself, the same windows I'd meticulously glazed and painted. But it was a stranger, a beautiful, empty vessel that had just ejected its soul, or what I had mistaken for its soul. There was no grand explosion of rage, no desperate pounding on the door. The shock was too deep, a concussive force that had rattled me down to the marrow, leaving only a hollow, ringing silence. My body moved before my mind did, operating on some ancient, self-preservation instinct. I walked numbly back to the Cheyenne, my footsteps feeling loud and clumsy in the quiet street. I didn't look back at the pile on the lawn. I couldn't. It was like looking at your own body after a fatal accident. I drove. I had no destination, so I just drove through the sleeping streets of Cedar Falls, the town I'd called home for nearly 50 years. The familiar landmarks, the town square, the old movie theater, the corner store where I'd bought Kevin countless comic books, all felt like scenes from someone else's life. They were props on a stage where I no longer had a part to play. After 20 minutes of aimless circling, I found myself on the highway at the edge of town, where the familiar neighborhoods gave way to gas stations and warehouses. A flickering neon sign cut through the darkness. The Cedar Inn, its looping cursive C half burnt out. It was a place I'd driven past 1,000 times without a second thought. Tonight, it looked like the only port in a storm. The room smelled of stale cigarettes, industrial strength cleaner, and a deep, abiding loneliness. The carpet was a swirl of brown and orange, thin and worn under my boots. A single dim lamp cast a jaundiced glow on a bed covered with a thin polyester comforter, patterned with faded pine cones. The air conditioner in the window rattled and wheezed like an old man on his deathbed. It was the exact opposite of home. It was an anonymous box designed for forgetting, for people in transit from one life to another. It was perfect. I drove back to the house, pulling up to the curb across the street. The lights were on inside now, casting warm squares of yellow onto the lawn. A silhouette moved past the living room window. Jess, probably. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound and terrifying emptiness. I got out, walked quickly to the side of the garage, and found the boxes Jess had mentioned. There were 3 of them, hastily packed. I didn't look inside. I just loaded them into the bed of my truck, my movements stiff and robotic, and drove back to the soulless comfort of room 112. Under the harsh fluorescent light of the motel room, I opened the first box. It was mostly clothes, wrinkled and crammed together. The second held random papers, old bills, car manuals, tax documents from a decade ago. It was in the third box, nestled between a pair of worn-out work sweaters, that I found it. A silver-plated frame holding a picture of me and Helen. It was taken the day we finished the porch restoration. We were both covered in sawdust and paint smudges, grinning at the camera like a couple of kids. Her arm was linked through mine, her head resting on my shoulder, and behind us the house stood proud and complete. Staring at her smiling face, the carefully constructed dam inside me finally broke. The grief wasn't a flood of tears. It was a silent, crushing weight that buckled my knees. I sank onto the edge of the stiff, unfamiliar bed, the photo held tight in my trembling hands, and the memory I'd pushed away for years came rushing back. The hospice room had been filled with the scent of lilies and antiseptic. Helen was so small in the bed, a frail bird wrapped in white sheets. The relentless hum of the machines was the only sound for a long time. Her eyes, still so bright and clear, found mine. "Art," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. I leaned in close, taking her cool, thin hand in mine. "I'm here, Helen. I'm right here." Her thumb brushed against my knuckles. "He's a good boy, Art," she'd said, her gaze drifting toward the window as if she could see the future out there. "But he's soft. He lets people push him. Jess, she's ambitious." "That's good, but you have to be his rock. You have to make sure he remembers where he comes from." Her eyes came back to me, and they were filled with a fierce, desperate love. "Promise me. Promise me this house will always take care of him, that it will always be his anchor." I squeezed her hand, my throat tight with unshed tears. "I promise, Helen," I had sworn, the words feeling like the most sacred vow I had ever made. "I will always be there for him. This house will always be his home. I swear it." The memory faded, leaving me back in the cold, buzzing silence of room 112. The promise echoed in the empty space, a testament to my failure. I hadn't just been thrown out of my house. I had broken my vow. I had failed the one person who had ever had complete faith in me. I had let her legacy, the home we'd poured our souls into, become nothing more than property with potential. I looked from the smiling woman in the photograph to my own reflection in the dark television screen. A tired, beaten old man, exiled and alone. The fury was gone. The shock was gone. All that was left was the hollow, aching certainty that I had lost everything that ever mattered. The night in room 112 was a long, slow drowning. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of that stiff, alien bed and let the grief wash over me in silent, suffocating waves. The television flickered without sound, casting a procession of ghostly blue images across the room, laughing families in car commercials, smiling newscasters, impossibly happy people living impossibly perfect lives. Each one was a small, sharp jab to my soul. The photo of Helen sat on the bedside table, a beacon from a world that felt 1,000,000 miles away. By the time the first hint of a watery, gray dawn began to dilute the darkness outside, I felt scoured out, a hollow shell of a man. The despair hadn't lessened, but it had settled into a kind of heavy, physical exhaustion. It was the mundane reality of being human that finally made me move. My mouth tasted like rust, and my clothes felt grimy. I needed to brush my teeth. I needed a clean shirt. These simple biological needs forced me to my feet, my joints protesting as I stood. I turned to the boxes, my movements slow and leaden. I had no energy to be angry, no will to be sad. I was just a man looking for a tube of toothpaste in the wreckage of his life. I sifted through the first 2 boxes again, finding nothing. It was in the 3rd box, the one I'd taken the photo from, that my search came to an end. My fingers, numbly searching for the familiar shape of a dop kit, brushed against something hard, cold, and rectangular at the very bottom. Hidden beneath a thick wool sweater, Helen had knitted for me years ago. Curiosity, a long-dormant emotion, stirred faintly within me. I pulled the sweater aside. It was my old lockbox. A heavy, fireproof iron box, painted a drab institutional gray, its surface covered in scratches and a few ancient splatters of engine paint. I hadn't seen it in at least 5 years. It used to sit on the bottom shelf of my main workbench, a silent guardian of important papers. When I retired, I must have cleared it off and shoved it into a closet, and it had faded from my memory. Jess, in her frantic, careless purge, must have just swept the entire contents of the closet shelf into a box without a second glance. The irony was a faint, bitter taste in my mouth. In her haste to dispose of my history, she had inadvertently packed up its most important chapter. I dragged the heavy box onto the floor. Of course, the key was long gone, probably sitting in a dusty jar of miscellaneous hardware back in my garage. For a moment, a wave of that familiar hopelessness washed over me. Another dead end, another locked door. But then, as I stared at the simple wafer lock, something else stirred. It was the ghost of the man I used to be. I was Art Vance. I'd spent 40 years solving problems encased in steel. A cheap lock wasn't a barrier, it was a puzzle. A new energy, cool and clear, began to cut through the fog of my grief. I walked out to the Cheyenne, the early morning air crisp against my face. From the small emergency kit I always kept under the seat, I pulled out a thin flathead screwdriver and a tension wrench. Back in the room, I didn't attack the lock with force. I knelt on the floor and worked with the quiet, focused patience of a surgeon. The act of holding my tools, of feeling the familiar weight of them in my hands, was like coming home. Within a minute, I felt the tumblers give way with a soft, satisfying click. The lid opened with a slight hydraulic hiss. The contents smelled of old paper and time. On top were the original titles for cars I hadn't owned in 30 years. A '68 Mustang, a '79 F-100. Beneath them was the pristine, current title for my Cheyenne. And under that, at the very bottom, was a thick manila envelope, its edges soft and yellowed. Helen's elegant, perfect cursive was written on the tab, as clear as the day she'd written it. It said, "House, Original Docs." My heart gave a painful thud. I lifted the envelope out. It was heavy, dense with paper. I sat down at the small, rickety desk by the window and carefully undid the clasp. I slid the contents out onto the desk's scarred laminate surface. It was all there. The original property survey from 1000, $952. The first deed transfer to the previous owners. And then our papers. The mortgage application from when Kevin and Jess moved in, the loan agreements, the insurance policies, and finally, the deed. The official, notarized, county-stamped deed. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was just touching the artifacts of my own life, tracing the legal lineage of the home Helen and I had poured our souls into. But as I read through the dense, legal language, my mechanic's brain, the part of me that was trained to read schematics and find the one tiny detail that was out of place, began to wake up. The grief was still there, a great, silent weight in the room, but it was no longer the only thing. As the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting a pale, hopeful light into the shabby motel room, I leaned forward, a strange new feeling taking root in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It was purpose. I had a problem in front of me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the familiar, powerful urge to find a solution. Dawn in room 112 was a confirmation, not a comfort. The pale light revealed the room in all its shabby detail, the stains on the carpet, the cracks in the ceiling, the profound, soul-deep weariness of a place that had seen too much transience and not enough hope. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I wasn't looking at the room. I was looking at the papers spread across the desk. They were a map of my life, a history written in legal jargon and financial statements. The despair of the previous night hadn't vanished, but it had receded, replaced by the cold, clear focus of a mechanic staring at a complex engine that had seized up. I didn't know how to fix it yet, but for the first time I was looking at the schematics. I showered, put on one of the wrinkled but clean shirts from the box, and drank the motel's watery, bitter coffee while I used the thin phone book I found in the nightstand drawer. I wasn't looking for the biggest law firm with a flashy, full-page ad. I was looking for a name that sounded solid, dependable. I found a small, shared office downtown. Ramirez and Associates, Property and Family Law. It sounded straightforward, uncomplicated. I called the moment their office opened at 9. A polite voice answered, and I kept my own voice steady and even. My name is Arthur Vance. I need a consultation regarding a property ownership question. The sooner, the better. An hour later, I was sitting in a clean, modern waiting room that smelled faintly of lemon and paper. It was nothing like the dusty, wood-paneled offices I'd imagined. A young woman came out to greet me. "Mr. Vance? I'm Anna Ramirez. Please come in." She couldn't have been more than 35, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a firm, no-nonsense handshake that I immediately respected. I felt a bit self-conscious in my work boots and worn jeans, holding my old yellowed envelope like a child bringing a broken toy to be fixed. Her office was like her, organized, bright, and efficient. I sat across a sleek glass desk as she opened a fresh legal pad. "So," she began, her tone professionally compassionate, "tell me what's going on." As calmly and factually as I could, I laid it all out. The years of living with my son and his wife. The agreement that I would cover the mortgage payments after the refinance. The restoration of the house, the promise to my wife, and the sudden, brutal eviction 2 days ago. I kept my voice level, sticking to the facts, not the feelings. I saw a flicker of sympathy in her eyes, the kind of professional reserves for the sad, familiar stories of families tearing themselves apart. When I was done, she gave a slow nod. "I'm very sorry you're going through this, Mr. Vance," she said gently. "These situations are incredibly difficult. Legally, since it was their house and the arrangement was informal, your options might be limited. At best, we could argue you were a tenant with certain rights." "I have the documents," I interrupted, pushing the old manila envelope across the glass desk. "From when we set up the loan." She paused, then took the envelope. I watched as her practiced, professional eyes began to scan the papers. She started with the mortgage application, her expression unchanging. She moved on to the payment records I'd included, little stubs from the bank I'd meticulously saved over the years. Then she got to the core documents, the loan origination agreement from the bank, and finally the county deed. I saw the change immediately. It wasn't a dramatic gasp, but something quieter, more intense. Her focus sharpened. She stopped skimming and started reading, her finger tracing a line of text. She put the deed down and picked up the bank's loan agreement, placing them side by side. She read them both again. Her eyebrows, which had been knitted in sympathy, now drew together in intense concentration. A full minute of silence passed, broken only by the soft hum of the computer on her desk. I felt my own heart begin to beat a little faster, a nervous, hopeful rhythm. Finally, she looked up at me, and her professional mask was gone. In its place was a look of profound, unadulterated surprise. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice different now, charged with a new energy. This changes everything." She turned the documents around so I could see them. "When you refinanced the house, what was your understanding of the arrangement?" "I was helping them," I said. "I was a co-signer. I was helping my son buy his family home." Anna shook her head slowly, a small, incredulous smile playing on her lips. "No, you weren't. Look here," she said, pointing to a line on the loan document. "The bank wouldn't approve a loan with your son and his wife as the primary borrowers. Their credit or income must have been insufficient. So the bank structured the loan with you as the sole borrower. The debt is entirely in your name." Then she slid the deed forward, and to secure that loan, the title of the house had to match. "Mr. Vance, your name is the only one on this deed. You didn't co-sign for your son's house. You bought it. You've been paying the mortgage on a property that you, and you alone, legally own outright." The words seemed to hang in the air, rearranging the entire world around me. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had just dropped away and been replaced by solid ground. I don't understand. They live there." "Their legal status," Anna said, her voice now crisp and clear as she shifted into lawyer mode, "is that of tenants. Tenants who have likely never signed a lease and have not been paying rent to the legal owner. In fact, they're not even tenants. Legally, they're occupants. Squatters with a familiar relationship." She leaned back in her chair, the full weight of the situation dawning on both of us. They didn't just kick their father out of their house. They kicked the owner out of his own house. The sheer staggering arrogance of it hit me like a physical blow. The lectures about clutter, the talk of realizing the property's potential, the final, dismissive act of changing the locks. All of it was a fantasy they had built on a foundation of my money and a complete ignorance of the law. They weren't powerful homeowners getting rid of a burden. They were children playing dress-up in their father's clothes, and they'd just thrown the real owner out into the street. The frozen knot of grief and fury in my gut didn't melt, but something new formed around it, a core of cold, hard, righteous steel. Anna watched the transformation on my face. She waited a moment, then leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "So, Mr. Vance," she asked, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of 1,000 possibilities, "what would you like to do?" I looked across the glass desk at Ana Ramirez, the weight of her question settling not as a burden but as an anchor. "What would you like to do?" For the first time in years, the answer was completely, unequivocally mine. All my life, my decisions had been filtered through the lens of being a husband, a father, a provider. My blueprint was always about building something for someone else. Now, the old plans were ash. It was time to draw a new one. "I want to sell the house," I said. The words were quiet, but they landed in the silent office with the force of a gavel. Anna nodded, a flicker of something respect, maybe in her eyes. "Okay," she said, shifting immediately into strategy. "We can begin eviction proceedings. It's a formal process, but given that you are the sole owner, it's straightforward. It will take 30 to 60 days, depending on how they respond." I held up a hand. "No," I said, the clarity in my own mind surprising me. "I don't want to fight. I don't want another conversation. I don't want to spend one more minute of my life trying to get them to understand what they did." I leaned forward, my voice dropping lower, harder. "I'm not trying to get them out, Miss Ramirez. I'm trying to get out. I want the property, and my connection to it, liquidated, cleanly, completely." A slow smile of understanding spread across Anna's face. "You want to cut the cord," she said. "I want to take an axe to it," I replied. "I need a realtor, not someone who puts happy families on bus benches. I need a shark, someone fast, professional, and who isn't afraid of a messy situation." Anna didn't hesitate. She picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. "Maggie, it's Anna. I've got a client for you. A motivated seller with a prime craftsman in Cedar Falls. Yes, it's a bit of a delicate occupant situation." "Exactly. That's why I called you. Can you meet us in an hour?" Margaret Maggie Walsh's office was on the top floor of a downtown building, with a panoramic view of the Cascade Mountains. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, a perfectly tailored blazer, and an aura of lethal competence. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. After Anna made the introductions, Maggie got straight to it. Anna gave me the broad strokes. You're the sole owner, the occupants are your son and his wife, and you want to sell. Fast. Is that correct, Mr. Vance? That's correct, I said, feeling a sense of partnership with this woman I'd just met. We spoke the same language, the language of getting things done. Good, she said, turning to her computer and pulling up the property records. Okay, 4-bedroom, 2-bath, beautiful millwork from the photos, a house with real character. They don't build them like this anymore. She looked at me. The market is hot for homes with history, but the occupant situation will scare off some buyers. Then we find a buyer who isn't scared, I said. I laid out my terms, the words coming out as a clear, precise blueprint. 1. The house is to be listed by tomorrow afternoon. 2. Price it to sell, not to sit on the market. I'm not looking to squeeze every last penny out of it. I'm looking for a clean exit. 3. I will not be present for any showings or meetings. Your communication with me will be by email only, unless there is a formal offer. I paused, taking a breath before delivering the final, most important instruction. And 4. The current occupants are a condition of the property. They have no say in the price, the showings, or the sale. You have my legal authorization, which Miss Ramirez will provide, to show the property at any reasonable time with 24 hours' notice. Their cooperation is not required. Do not engage with them beyond that. They are no longer part of my calculation. Maggie listened to it all, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she simply nodded. Understood, Mr. Vance. That's the clearest seller mandate I've had all year. I can have our photographer on site tomorrow morning. The sign can go in the lawn at the same time. The listing will be live on the MLS by 3 p.m. She slid a standard listing agreement across the table. This is what moving forward looks like. I picked up the pen. As my signature flowed across the paper, a profound sense of peace washed over me. It wasn't the warm contentment of the life I'd lost, but a new, cooler kind of peace. The peace of a decision made. The peace of taking back control. I was no longer a victim sitting in a motel room. I was a client, a seller, an owner executing his rights. I was signing away the house Helen and I had built, but I was also signing the founding document of my own new independent life. I stood up and shook Maggie's hand. Thank you for your time. I'll be in touch when I have an offer, she said, her eyes conveying a clear message. I'll get this done. Walking out of that building and into the afternoon sun, I felt lighter than I had in years. I didn't know where I was going to sleep that night, but for the first time, I knew exactly where I was headed. Forward, back in the stale quiet of room 112. I moved with a mechanic's efficiency. There was no sentiment in my actions now, only a series of logical steps. I sorted the contents of the 3 boxes, creating one pile of essential papers and clothes, and another, larger pile of things I could live without. The silver-framed photo of Helen I, wrapped carefully in a clean t-shirt and placed on the passenger seat of the Cheyenne. Everything else went into the truck bed, secured under a tarp. The whole process took less than an hour. My life, or what was left of it, was now entirely mobile. Before I checked out, I performed one last, crucial task. I sat on the edge of the bed, my cell phone in my hand. It felt heavy, a direct line to the world of pain and betrayal I was about to leave behind. I looked at the screen, at the missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, probably my old neighbors, wondering what was going on. With a final, decisive press of my thumb, I powered the device down. The screen went black. I opened the glove compartment, tossed the phone inside, and slammed it shut. It was a lock turning, a door closing. They had locked me out. Now, I was locking them out. I left the motel key on the counter and drove away without a backward glance. I didn't get on the interstate right away. Instead, I drove to a small diner on the outskirts of town and had a proper breakfast. Eggs, bacon, hash browns, and 3 cups of strong black coffee. I ate slowly, methodically. This wasn't a meal, it was fuel. It was a ritual. When I was done, I paid in cash, walked out into the bright morning, and climbed into the cab of my truck. I merged onto the I-5 and pointed the nose north. I had no destination, no plan beyond putting miles between me and Cedar Falls. As the familiar landscape gave way to the open road, I felt the great, crushing weight on my chest begin to lift, molecule by molecule. The next morning, the sun rose over my old street in Cedar Falls, casting a golden, forgiving light on the manicured lawns and quiet houses. A Friday, the start of a peaceful weekend. A sprinkler on a neighboring lawn clicked on, its rhythmic spray the only sound in the tranquil air. At precisely 8:30 a.m., a clean late-model sedan with the Walsh Realty logo tastefully displayed on its side pulled up to the curb in front of my former home. A young woman in a sharp blazer got out, all business and efficiency. She retrieved a slender wooden post, a hanging sign, and a small mallet from her trunk. She walked onto the lawn I had meticulously reseeded 2 years prior, and found the perfect spot just to the left of the stone walkway. With a few practiced, efficient movements, she began to hammer the post into the soft, damp earth. The sound cut through the morning quiet. Thump, thump, thump. Each blow was a sharp, percussive nail being driven into the coffin of a carefully constructed illusion. She attached the sign, straightened it, and stepped back to admire her work. It hung perfectly level, the bold, white letters on a field of deep blue proclaiming, "For sale." Inside, Jessica Vance was standing at her gleaming quartz countertop, blending a kale and spinach smoothie. The house was her sanctuary, a testament to her good taste and her victory. The past few days had been an exercise in controlled purging, bagging up the last of Art's junk and planning the conversion of the garage into a home gym. She heard the hammering and frowned, annoyed at the disruption. She glanced out the large picture window, expecting to see a neighbor putting up a birdhouse. Instead, she saw the sign. For a full 10 seconds, her brain refused to process the image. It was a cognitive glitch, an impossible object in her perfect world. Her first thought was that it was a mistake, a prank. She put her blender cup down and walked, her annoyance turning to confusion, out the front door. She stopped at the edge of the porch. It was real. Walsh Realty, a name she knew, one of the top firms in the county. Beneath it, a smaller sign was attached. Sale pending. A cold, sickening dread washed over her, so intense it made her feel dizzy. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. She whirled around and stormed back inside, her mask of calm composure shattering like fine china. "Kevin!" she shrieked, her voice high and sharp with panic. "Kevin! Get down here now!" Kevin came stumbling down the stairs, still buttoning his shirt for work. "What? What's wrong?" She didn't speak. She just pointed a trembling finger out the window. He followed her gaze, his face draining of all color. What is that? That's not possible. He can't." "Call him," Jess hissed, her mind racing. "Call your father, right now." Kevin fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely unlock it. He found Dad in his contacts and hit the call button, pressing the phone to his ear. As he listened, his expression of panic curdled into one of utter, hollow terror. He lowered the phone, looking at his wife with wide, terrified eyes. It went straight to voicemail. 200 miles to the north, I had pulled the Cheyenne into a scenic overlook somewhere on the rugged Washington coast. The salty air was cool and clean. Far below, massive waves crashed against black, volcanic rock, sending plumes of white spray into the sky. I leaned against the guardrail, sipping hot coffee from my old thermos. I hadn't felt this calm, this clear, in years. I was unreachable, I was at peace, and my new life had just begun. The first day of my new life was measured in miles and sea spray. I drove north along the coast, the Pacific Ocean, a vast, churning expanse of deep blue to my left. I kept the windows of the Cheyenne down, letting the cool, salty air whip through the cab, cleansing the last lingering scent of motel room despair. I wasn't running from something anymore. I was driving toward an unknown horizon, and the feeling was intoxicating. I stopped in a tiny fishing village called Port Madison, a place that seemed to have been forgotten by time, and ate a bowl of the best clam chowder I'd ever tasted at a diner overlooking the harbor. No one knew me. I was just an old man in a classic truck, and the anonymity was a balm to my bruised soul. That night, I found a small, rustic cabin-style motel, perched on a bluff. It was the opposite of room 112. It was clean, smelled of cedar wood, and the window looked out over the endless ocean. I sat on the small porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. I didn't think about the house. I didn't think about Kevin or Jess. I just watched the waves roll in, one after another, and felt the tight, angry knot in my chest slowly, finally, begin to unclench. Back in Cedar Falls, the voicemails began. They were a digital record of a slow-motion collapse. Friday, 10:15 a.m. A message from Kevin, his voice tight with confusion and forced bravado. "Dad? It's Kevin. Listen, there's some kind of mistake here. Some realty company put a for sale sign on our lawn. Call me back as soon as you get this so we can get it sorted out. It's weird." Friday, 1:30 p.m. A message from Jessica, her voice like ice chips. "Art. This isn't funny. I don't know what kind of passive-aggressive game you're playing, but you've made your point. You will call this realtor Maggie Walsh, and you will tell her to remove her sign from my property immediately. Do you understand me? Before the entire neighborhood starts talking." Friday, 4:52 p.m. Kevin again, the anger now tinged with the first notes of panic. "Okay, Dad," I called the realtor. "She said she's working for you. She said she couldn't tell me anything else." "What is going on? Pick up the phone. This isn't a joke anymore." On the second day, I explored. I walked for hours along a deserted, windswept beach, collecting pieces of sea-worn driftwood. The physical act of walking, of feeling my muscles work, felt good. I was reconnecting with my own body, my own strength. I found a used bookstore in town and bought a thick paperback thriller, the kind of book I hadn't had the time or peace of mind to read in years. I was rediscovering the simple, quiet pleasures that my life of obligation had crowded out. The voicemails continued their downward spiral. They had clearly spent Saturday trying and failing to get answers, their powerlessness driving them to the edge. Saturday, 11:20 a.m. Jessica, her voice strained, losing its polished edge. "I've spoken to our attorney, Art. He says you can't just sell the house out from under us. We have rights. You have no idea the legal trouble you are bringing down on yourself. You are making a monumental mistake." Saturday, 6:15 p.m. Kevin, his voice softer now, pleading. "Dad, I don't understand. Why are you doing this? If this is about what happened, we can talk. I can explain." Jess was just. She was stressed. "We can fix this. Whatever it is, we can fix it. Just please, call me back. I'm begging you." On the third day, Sunday, I didn't drive at all. I sat on my motel porch, read my book, and watched the fishing boats head out in the early morning mist. I felt a sense of stillness I thought I had lost forever. I saw a father and his young son on the beach below, skipping stones across the water. A brief, sharp pang of sadness for the relationship I thought I had with Kevin pierced through me, but it faded as quickly as it came, replaced by the calm acceptance of the present moment. I was mourning a memory, not a reality. By Monday morning, the desperation back home had reached a fever pitch. The sale pending sign was a constant, mocking reminder of their new reality. Monday, 9:05 a.m. A message from Kevin. His voice was thick with emotion, cracking. Dad, I'm sorry. Okay? For everything. I'm so sorry." I just stood there. I didn't say anything, and I've never been so ashamed of myself. I messed up. I know I did. But please don't do this. Don't take our home. It's the only home our family has. Whatever you want, I'll do it. Just call me. That afternoon, I found the local town library, a quiet little place that smelled of old books and floor polish. It was the first time I'd had access to the internet. I sat down at a public computer, logged into my email account, and saw a new message from Maggie Walsh. The subject line was simple: offer received. I clicked it open. It was a clean all-cash offer from a pre-approved buyer, slightly above asking price. They wanted to close in 2 weeks. I read the email twice, a calm, unreadable expression on my face. The frantic, emotional chaos happening 200 miles away felt like a broadcast from another planet. I composed a short, simple reply. "Maggie, please accept the offer. Prepare the paperwork. Art." I hit send, closed the laptop, and walked out of the library into the bright, clear afternoon. The blueprint was almost complete. The library was an oasis of hushed reverence, a stark contrast to the emotional storm raging 200 miles away. I clicked open the email from Maggie Walsh, and the sterile, black and white text on the screen laid out the future of the home I had built. Subject: Offer received, 124 Cedar Lane. Art: We have a very strong offer, all cash, $15,000 over asking price, from a pre-approved buyer, Benjamin and Sarah Carter. They can close in 10 business days. This is as clean an offer as you will ever see. They are a young local couple. He's a firefighter with the Cedar Falls Fire Department, and she's a second-grade teacher at Northwood Elementary. They have a baby due in December. They lost out on 3 other houses in this market and are incredibly motivated. Ordinarily, I don't pass these along, but they insisted on writing a letter. I've attached it as a PDF. In my professional opinion, this is the offer to take. Let me know how you wish to proceed. Regards, Maggie Walsh. My eyes went to the attachment. I clicked, and a scanned, handwritten letter filled the screen. The handwriting was a neat, hopeful, cursive, the kind you'd expect from a second-grade teacher. Dear homeowner, it began. We know this is a bit unusual, but we wanted to tell you how much we love your home. We've been looking for a place to start our family for almost a year, and we've seen so many houses that feel like generic, soulless boxes. But yours has character. It has a soul. We stood on the sidewalk for half an hour, just admiring the details. The beautiful wisteria on the porch, the original built-in bookshelves we could see through the living room window, and the incredible garden space in the back. My husband, Ben, talked about how they just don't build houses with such good bones anymore. I could immediately picture our child taking their first steps on that hardwood floor, and us hosting Thanksgiving for our parents in that warm, inviting dining room. We want to be more than just owners of a property. We want to be caretakers of a home with a history. We want to put down roots in this community and raise our family here. We promise we will cherish it and care for it for years to come. Thank you for considering our offer. Sincerely, Ben and Sarah Carter. I read the letter 3 times. A strange, unexpected emotion welled up in my chest. It wasn't sadness. It was a profound and deeply satisfying sense of correctness. This was the destiny of the house. This was the life I had envisioned for it, the future I had tried to give to a son who didn't want it, a firefighter and a teacher. People who served, who built, who cared. They didn't see property potential or a cluttered aesthetic. They saw a home. They saw Helen's wisteria. They saw the bookshelves I had built with my own hands. They saw the soul of the place. My promise to Helen echoed in my mind, but this time it wasn't a source of pain. Make sure this house always takes care of the family. It would. It was finally going to the right family. The rightful heirs. My fingers, steady and sure, typed out the reply I'd already composed in my head. Maggie, please accept the offer. Prepare the paperwork. Art. I hit send. In that single quiet click, the fate of the Craftsman bungalow on Cedar Lane was sealed. The great, unstoppable machinery of a legal real estate transaction began to turn. Somewhere, a notification pinged on Maggie's computer. A phone call was made to an excited young couple. Contracts were drawn up. Title searches were initiated. An entire sequence of events was set in motion, each step methodical, official, and utterly irreversible. And back in Cedar Falls, inside the house that was no longer theirs, my son and his wife were still completely oblivious. They were leaving another desperate, pleading voicemail on a dead phone, fighting a war that had, unbeknownst to them, already been lost. I logged out of the computer, pushed my chair in, and walked out of the library, leaving the digital chaos behind. I got in my truck and kept driving north. The sale of my old life was now in the capable hands of others. My work was done. The house had found its way home. The 2 weeks I spent on the road were a kind of baptism. I drove through the dense, cathedral-like forests of the Olympic Peninsula, spent 2 days on a ferry weaving through the San Juan Islands, and ended up in a small town in the high desert of eastern Washington. I spoke to fishermen, librarians, and waitresses. I read 3 books. I learned how to be alone again, not as a widower defined by loss, but as a man defined by himself. The anger and grief were still there, but they were no longer a raging storm. They were a distant rumbling thunder on a horizon I had already left behind. I had a slight tan, my thoughts were clear, and for the first time in a decade, I felt like the sole author of my own days. I drove back into Cedar Falls on the morning of the closing. The town looked exactly the same, but I was seeing it through new eyes. It was just a place, a collection of streets and buildings, no longer the keeper of my history or the container for my pain. I checked into a clean, respectable hotel downtown, a place with a firm mattress and good water pressure, a small but significant upgrade from the desperation of room 112. That afternoon, I sat in Anna Ramirez's office and signed the final papers. The process was swift, professional, and deeply anticlimactic. A wire transfer was initiated, a deed was filed. It was done. That evening, I bought a cheap prepaid cell phone from a drugstore. I sent a single text message to Kevin's number. The daily grind. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Be there. I didn't ask. I instructed. Then I turned the phone off. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early the next morning. It was a neutral space, bustling with the low hum of conversation and the hiss of an espresso machine. I chose a small, two-person table in a corner, a location that was private but not isolated. I ordered a black coffee and sat, calm and prepared, watching the door. They arrived together, looking like survivors of a shipwreck. The past 2 weeks had ravaged them. Jess, who had always been so perfectly put together, looked haggard. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled. There were dark circles under her eyes, and the confident, icy composure was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate anxiety. Kevin looked even worse. He was pale, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he seemed to have aged 10 years. He walked with the shuffling, defeated gait of a man who had already surrendered. They slid into the chairs opposite me, the silence stretching between us, thick and heavy. It was Jess who broke it, her voice a reedy, trembling version of its former self. "Art, thank God," she began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "We've been so worried. We've been calling everyone. We didn't know what to think. This whole thing, this has been a nightmare." Kevin just stared at the tabletop, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "Dad," he mumbled, "we are so sorry. What we did, it was wrong. It was horrible. We panicked. Please, just tell us this is some kind of lesson. Tell us you've made your point and we can go home." I let them talk. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the hot, bitter liquid grounding me in the present. They went on, a desperate, chaotic duet of excuses, apologies, and frantic bargaining. They talked about the neighbors whispering, about the humiliation of the sign on the lawn, about how they could pay rent, how they could make it up to me, how they could change. I listened with a kind of detached curiosity, like a scientist observing a chemical reaction. The emotional pleas that once would have gutted me now felt like words spoken in a foreign language. They were talking about a family that no longer existed. When their flood of words finally subsided into a series of ragged breaths, I placed my coffee cup down on its saucer with a soft, definitive click. I looked at them, my gaze level and steady, and I spoke. My voice was quiet, even, and completely devoid of the anger they expected or the forgiveness they craved. "The house is sold," I said. The 4 words hung in the air like smoke. Jess recoiled as if I'd slapped her. Kevin visibly flinched. "What?" "No," Jess stammered. "The sign said, 'Sale pending.' That doesn't mean—" "The sale closed yesterday morning at 11 a.m., I continued, my voice unchanging. "The new owners are a young couple, a firefighter, and a teacher. They're expecting their first child." Jess stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, the gears in her tactical mind grinding to a halt against a reality she could not outmaneuver. You can't be serious." "I am," I said. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper, placing it on the table between us. "According to the terms of the legally binding sales agreement, the current occupants have 30 days from the date of closing to vacate the premises. That date is October 25th. I pushed the paper slightly toward them. After that, you will be considered trespassers on private property, and the new owners will be within their rights to have you removed by the sheriff's department." A choked, desperate sound escaped Kevin's throat. He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with tears. "Our home, Dad, that's our home." "It was my home," I corrected him gently. "And you made it very clear that I was no longer welcome in it." Jess made one last, desperate play. Her expression shifted, trying to summon a look of wounded sincerity. "What would Helen think of this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What would your wife think of you tearing your own family apart over a mistake?" The mention of her name didn't wound me. It clarified everything. I looked directly at Jessica, and for the first time, I think she saw the man I had become. Helen asked me to do one thing, I said, my voice as calm and solid as bedrock. She asked me to make sure the house would always take care of the family. And I have. It's going to a wonderful family who will build a life there and cherish it. My promise to her has been kept. The finality of it, the way I had taken their last weapon and turned it into my own shield of honor, finally broke them. Jess slumped back in her chair, a look of utter, vacant defeat on her face. Kevin dropped his head into his hands and began to sob, his shoulders shaking. I stood up. I pulled a $5 bill from my pocket and laid it on the table to cover my coffee. This conversation is over, I said, not unkindly. I pulled out a small business card and placed it next to the folded paper. Any further questions you have can be directed to my attorney, Anna Ramirez. She has all the relevant documents. I looked at my son, a weeping, broken man, and then at his wife, who had gambled everything and lost, and I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just the quiet, clean peace of a chapter that was finally, truly, over. I wish you both well, I said. And then I turned, walked out of the coffee shop into the bright autumn day, and did not look back. Leaving the coffee shop, I didn't feel a victor's triumph, just the quiet, hollow echo of a necessary amputation. The connection was severed, the past was cauterized. But there was one last piece of business, something that had nothing to do with lawyers or contracts, and everything to do with the promise I had made to Helen. I made a call to Maggie Walsh. I know it's unusual, I said, but I'd like to meet the new owners. Just for a moment, there's something I want to give them. Maggie, ever the professional, arranged it for that afternoon. I pulled the Cheyenne up to the curb of my old street for what I knew would be the last time. The bold red sold banner was slashed across the realty sign, a definitive, final statement. Standing on the lawn, looking up at the house with expressions of pure, unadulterated joy, were the Carters. Ben was tall and broad-shouldered, with the calm, steady look of a man you'd want carrying you out of a burning building. Sarah, his wife, was radiant, her hand resting on her pregnant belly as she pointed out the details of the porch trim to him. They looked like they already belonged. They saw me and broke into wide, welcoming smiles. There was no awkwardness, no apprehension, just a genuine, heartfelt warmth. "Mr. Vance?" Sarah said, walking carefully toward me. "I'm Sarah, and this is Ben. We are so happy to meet you." Ben shook my hand, his grip firm and sincere. "Sir, we can't thank you enough. This house is a dream come true for us." "The pleasure is all mine," I said, and I was surprised by how much I meant it. "I just wanted to stop by to wish you well in person." I looked past them at the house, at the wisteria vines Helen had so lovingly trained up the columns. This was a happy home for a very long time. "I have a feeling you'll make it one again." "We're certainly going to try," Ben said. "I was just looking at the built-in bookshelves in the living room. Did you build those yourself, sir? The craftsmanship is incredible." "I did," I said, a small flicker of my old pride returning. "A winter project back in '98. "I knew it," he said with a grin. "They don't make them like that anymore." It was such a simple statement, but it meant the world. He saw the work. He saw the care. He didn't see an outdated feature. He saw craftsmanship. He saw what Jess had called clutter, and recognized it as character. "I won't keep you," I said, reaching into the cab of my truck and retrieving a small leather-bound book. It was old, the cover softened with age, the pages yellowed. "This is what I wanted to give you." I handed the book to Sarah. "It's not an official document or anything important like that. It's just a little ledger my wife Helen kept when we were restoring the place." Sarah opened it carefully, her eyes wide. Inside, Helen's neat, elegant script filled the pages. "She recorded everything," I explained, my voice a little thick. "The date we reshingled the roof, the brand of paint we used in the kitchen in case we ever needed to touch it up. Silly little things. In the back, you'll find a map she drew of the garden. She listed every perennial she planted, with notes on how much sun they liked and when they bloomed." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she traced a line of her own, an ancestor's handwriting. She looked up at me, her expression one of profound gratitude. "Mr. Vance, this is the most thoughtful gift I have ever received," she whispered. "It's the home story." "We'll take good care of it, sir," Ben said, placing a protective hand on his wife's shoulder. He looked me square in the eye. "I promise." That single word, spoken with such simple, honest conviction, healed a wound inside me I didn't know was still bleeding. This was a promise that would be kept. This was the promise I had been trying to fulfill all along. I had ensured the house would take care of a family, the right family. "I know you will," I said. I gave them a final nod, a small but genuine smile finally reaching my own lips. I didn't offer to go inside. The inside, with its memories and ghosts, was no longer my territory. It was theirs now, a blank canvas for their own story. I got back in my truck and turned the key, the engine rumbling to life. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in my rearview mirror. I saw them standing together on the lawn, Sarah clutching the ledger to her chest, Ben's arm wrapped around her. They were looking at the house, not as a property, but as a future. My last image of my home wasn't one of betrayal or loss. It was an image of hope. The story of Art and Helen's house was over, and it had the happiest ending I could have ever imagined. The catharsis was complete. It was time to start writing my own next chapter. I drove away from Cedar Lane, and for the first time I didn't glance in the rearview mirror. There was no need. The image of the Carter family standing on the porch, holding Helen's ledger, was burned into my mind. It was a better, brighter, final memory than any I had a right to expect. The story of that house was finally over, and it had ended with a promise kept. I drove through the streets of Cedar Falls, the town that had been the entire map of my world for so long. I passed the park where I taught Kevin to ride a bike, the high school he graduated from, the church where I married Helen. They were just buildings now, landmarks in a life that belonged to another man. The town hadn't changed, but I had. I was no longer a resident. I was just passing through. On the edge of town, I passed the sign that read, "You are now leaving Cedar Falls. Come back soon." I knew I wouldn't. The Cheyenne hummed along the highway, the truck bed loaded with a carefully curated collection of my life, my tools, symbols of my skill, and the work of my hands, a few boxes of clothes and papers. And on the passenger seat, the silver-framed photo of Helen. I had distilled 40 years of accumulation down to the essential elements: my craft, my history, and my love. Everything else was just weight. In my bank account, accessible from any ATM in the country, sat the proceeds from the sale, a sum of money that represented not just the market value of a house, but the total cash value of a lifetime of work. It was a staggering number, and it meant one simple, powerful thing: I was free. I was beholden to no one and nothing. My time was my own. My future was a blank page. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the Washington sky in shades of gold and crimson, I thought about what a home really is. I had spent years believing it was a structure of wood and nails, a place you owned. I was wrong. A house is just a box. A home is what you build inside it. It's built with respect, with honesty, with gratitude, and with love. It's a place you earn day by day, through your character and your actions. Kevin and Jess had the house, but they never understood how to make it a home. They treated it like a prize they were owed, and in their entitlement, they hollowed it out, leaving nothing but an empty, beautiful shell. They never learned the simple truth that the most valuable things in life can't be owned or inherited. They can only be nurtured. It was a hard lesson, one they would now have a lifetime to contemplate from a rented apartment somewhere. I didn't know where I was going. Maybe I'd drive south, chase the sun down to Arizona, and see if I could find a small town that needed a good mechanic. Maybe I'd visit Dave and Mac, take a cross-country trip to see the Grand Canyon, a place Helen had always wanted to go. Maybe I'd just keep driving until the road ran out. For the first time in my life, I had no blueprint, no plan. The road stretching out before my headlights was the only map I needed. The past was a shrinking dot in the mirror. The future was a full tank of gas and an endless ribbon of asphalt. I turned the radio on, and an old rock song about being born to run filled the cab. I leaned back in my seat, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. My name is Art Vance, and for the first time, I was truly, completely on my way home.